The wagon wheel struck ice, and the entire world tilted sideways as Adelaide Morrison felt herself flying through the frigid air, her gloved hands grasping at nothing but winter wind before she crashed into a snowbank so deep it swallowed her whole. She heard horses neighing, the crack of wood splitting, and then a voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk, steady and commanding. "I've got you now." When she looked up through the cascade of snow falling from her lashes, a cowboy was dismounting from a paint horse, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget the cold seeping through her traveling clothes. Adelaide gasped as strong hands gripped her arms and pulled her from the snow. The stranger held her steady while she found her footing, his face weathered by sun and wind, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, with black hair that fell to his collar beneath a snow-dusted hat. His hands remained on her shoulders even after she was upright, as though he feared she might collapse again. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting over cattle and wind, but something in it suggested genuine concern rather than mere obligation. Adelaide shook her head, sending snow flying from her bonnet. "I don't think so, just shaken." She looked past him to where the wagon had veered off the mountain road, one wheel dangling over empty air. The driver was still in his seat, white-knuckled and trembling. "Mr. Patterson." "I'm all right, miss," the older man called back, his voice quavering. "But I don't think this wagon is going anywhere. That wheel is cracked clean through." The cowboy released Adelaide slowly, as if testing whether she would remain standing, then moved toward the wagon with purposeful strides. He examined the wheel, the axle, and the precarious position of the entire conveyance with the efficiency of someone who had seen his share of trail disasters. When he returned to Adelaide, his expression was grim. "The wheel is beyond fixing out here, and even if it wasn't, this wagon is too close to going over the edge. We need to get your belongings off before the weight sends it tumbling." He looked at the sky, where gray clouds were gathering with ominous intent. "And we need to do it fast. There's another storm coming, and from the look of those clouds, it will be here within the hour." Adelaide felt her heart sink. She had been traveling from Santa Fe to Lordsburg, New Mexico, carrying everything she owned in that wagon. Her father had died 3 months earlier, leaving her with nothing but debts and a teaching position waiting for her in Lordsburg. The position came with a small cottage and a salary that would allow her to survive, if barely. Everything she needed to start her new life was in that wagon. "I can help," she said, already moving toward the tilting conveyance. "No." The cowboy caught her arm, not roughly but firmly enough to stop her. "It's too dangerous. One wrong move and the whole thing goes over. Patterson and I will get what we can. You stay here with the horses." Adelaide wanted to argue, but she saw the logic in his words. The wagon was indeed precariously balanced, and adding her weight might be the very thing that sent it plummeting down the mountainside. She nodded reluctantly and watched as the two men worked with careful precision, handing down her trunk, a smaller case, a box of books, and a bundle wrapped in canvas that contained her mother's quilts. The cowboy was just reaching for the last item, a leather satchel containing her important papers, when the wagon groaned and shifted. Patterson scrambled out of the driver's seat with surprising agility for a man of his years, and the cowboy grabbed the satchel and leaped clear just as the wagon tipped and tumbled, crashing down the slope in a cacophony of splintering wood and screaming metal. Adelaide watched in horror as her few remaining possessions disappeared into the ravine below, the sound echoing off the mountain walls long after the wagon had settled at the bottom. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the nervous stamping of the horses. Adelaide stared at the empty road where the wagon had been, feeling tears prick her eyes but refusing to let them fall. She was 22 years old, alone in the world, and now stranded on a mountain road in the middle of a New Mexico winter with a snowstorm approaching. Crying would accomplish nothing. "At least we got the important things," the cowboy said quietly, coming to stand beside her. He still held her satchel, and he handed it to her now with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "Your papers are safe. Thank you." Adelaide clutched the satchel to her chest. "I don't even know your name. You saved my life, and I don't know what to call you." "Gideon Zimmerman." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was oddly formal given the circumstances. "I run a ranch about 10 miles from here, down in the valley. I was heading back from Silver City when I saw your wagon go off the road." Adelaide Morrison. She managed a small smile despite everything. "I was on my way to Lordsburg to take up a teaching position. I suppose I still am, if I can figure out how to get there." Gideon looked at the sky again, and Adelaide followed his gaze. The clouds were darker now, lower, and she could see the veil of snow already falling from them in the distance. The temperature was dropping rapidly and the wind was picking up, cutting through her wool coat as if it were nothing. "Lordsburg is another 20 miles south," Gideon said. "Patterson, can your horse carry you back to Silver City?" The driver nodded. "Yes, sir." "I'm sorry about this, Miss Morrison. I'll send word to Lordsburg about what happened. Let them know you will be delayed." "Delayed how long?" Adelaide asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Gideon met her eyes, and she saw something there she could not quite name. Not pity exactly, but understanding. "This storm is going to dump a lot of snow, Miss Morrison. These roads won't be passable for at least a week, maybe 2. You can't stay up here, and you can't make it to Lordsburg before the storm hits. My ranch is the closest shelter, and we need to leave now if we are going to make it before the worst of the weather arrives." Adelaide felt her stomach twist. Go with a stranger to his ranch, alone. Everything she had been taught about propriety screamed that this was improper, dangerous, scandalous. But what choice did she have? The alternative was freezing to death on this mountain road, and that seemed considerably worse than a potential scandal. "I don't want to impose," she began, but Gideon was already shaking his head. "It's not an imposition. It's survival. We can sort out propriety later after we are both somewhere warm and safe." He was already gathering her belongings, securing them to his horse with practiced efficiency. "Patterson, ride fast. You should make it back before the worst hits if you leave now." The older man mounted his horse, tipped his hat to Adelaide with an apologetic expression, and rode off at a gallop toward Silver City. Adelaide watched him disappear around a bend in the road, feeling as though her last connection to her planned, orderly future was vanishing with him. Gideon finished securing her trunk and turned to her. "Have you ever ridden double?" "No." Adelaide had limited experience with horses, having grown up in Santa Fe where her father had been a clerk. "I'm not sure I'll be very good at it." "You don't have to be good at it. You just have to hold on." Gideon swung into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand to her. "Put your foot on mine and I'll pull you up. You'll sit in front of me so I can keep you from falling." Adelaide hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was strong, calloused from years of ranch work, and he lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. She found herself seated sideways across the saddle in front of him, his arms coming around her to grip the reins. The position was shockingly intimate, his chest pressed against her back, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. "Hold onto the saddle horn," he instructed. "I'll keep you steady, but you need to help by keeping your balance." The horse started moving before Adelaide could respond, and she grabbed the saddle horn with both hands, her heart hammering. Gideon's left arm was firm across her middle, holding her in place, while his right hand controlled the reins with practiced ease. The horse moved at a steady trot, faster than Adelaide would have thought possible given the snowy conditions, but Gideon seemed to know every inch of the road. "How far did you say your ranch was?" Adelaide asked, having to raise her voice over the wind. 10 miles by road, but I know a shortcut that will get us there in half that distance. It's rougher terrain but faster, and right now speed matters more than comfort." Gideon urged the horse off the main road onto a narrow trail that wound down through pine trees heavy with snow. "Tell me about this teaching position." Adelaide suspected he was trying to distract her from the cold and the increasingly treacherous path, but she appreciated the effort. The school in Lordsburg needed a teacher who could handle students of all ages. I have experience teaching, and the position came with housing. After my father died, I needed to find work somewhere far from Santa Fe. Too many creditors, too many memories. I'm sorry about your father. Thank you. He was a good man, just not a practical one. He loved books and ideas more than money, which made him a terrible businessman. Adelaide felt snow beginning to fall, light flakes at first but increasing rapidly. He would have liked Lordsburg, I think. He always said the frontier was where America's future was being written. He might have been right about that, Gideon said. Though the writing process is messier than most folks back east realize. Lordsburg is a decent town, growing fast now that the railroad is established. You'll do well there as a teacher. People respect education, even if they don't always have much of it themselves. You seem well-spoken for a rancher. The words were out before Adelaide could stop them, and she immediately regretted the implied condescension. I'm sorry, that was rude. To her surprise, Gideon laughed, a low rumble she could feel through his chest. No offense taken. My mother was a schoolteacher herself, back in Texas. She made sure my brothers and I could read and write properly, even if we spent most of our time working cattle. She passed away 5 years ago, but I still hear her voice in my head correcting my grammar. I'm sorry for your loss. Adelaide felt the horse slip slightly on the snowy trail and tightened her grip on the saddle horn, but Gideon's arm remained steady around her, keeping her secure. Do your brothers work the ranch with you? No. One died in the war and the other went to California to try his luck in what's left of the gold fields. I haven't heard from him in 3 years. Gideon's voice was carefully neutral, but Adelaide heard the pain underneath. It's just me now, and the hands I hire during busy seasons. Right now it's winter, so I only have 2 men staying in the bunkhouse, and they're both out on the range checking on the cattle in the upper pastures. Adelaide processed this information with growing unease. So you're saying we'll be alone at the ranch? The hands should be back tonight or tomorrow morning, depending on the weather. But yes, for a few hours at least, it will just be the 2 of us. Gideon's tone was matter of fact. I know that's not ideal for your reputation, Miss Morrison, but I'm not sure what else to suggest. You can't stay outside, and I can't magic up a chaperone out of thin air. He was right, of course. Adelaide knew she should be more concerned about the impropriety of the situation. But at the moment, she was more worried about the snow, which was now falling so heavily she could barely see the trail ahead. The wind had picked up too, howling through the trees and cutting through her coat like knives. She was shivering despite Gideon's warmth at her back. Here. Gideon shifted slightly, managing to unwrap a thick wool coat from behind the saddle without loosening his hold on her. Put this on over your own coat. You're freezing. What about you? Adelaide asked, but she was already accepting the coat, grateful for the extra layer. I'm used to the cold. Been riding in worse than this since I was 10 years old. Gideon urged the horse faster as the trail began to descend more steeply. "We're almost to the valley. Once we're out of the mountains, the wind won't be as bad." Adelaide had lost all sense of time and direction by the time the trail finally leveled out and the trees thinned. She could see nothing but white in every direction, snow and sky blending into a featureless expanse that made her dizzy. She closed her eyes and concentrated on breathing, on staying conscious, on holding on. "There." Gideon's voice held relief. "That's home." Adelaide opened her eyes and saw, emerging from the white like a mirage, a low ranch house with smoke rising from its chimney. There was a barn nearby and several other outbuildings, all surrounded by fencing that was rapidly disappearing under the snow. It looked warm and safe and impossibly welcoming after the nightmare of the journey. Gideon rode straight to the barn, dismounting as soon as they were inside and out of the wind. He reached up and lifted Adelaide down, and this time her legs refused to hold her. She would have fallen if he had not kept his hands on her waist, steadying her until the feeling returned to her feet. "Easy," he said softly. "Give yourself a minute. You've had a rough day." That was such an understatement that Adelaide laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in the dim barn. Gideon looked at her with concern, and she shook her head, trying to compose herself. "I'm all right, just overwhelmed." Adelaide looked around the barn, taking in the neat stalls and stored supplies. "Thank you for bringing me here. I know it must be an inconvenience." "Stop thanking me." Gideon was already unsaddling his horse, his movements quick and efficient. Any decent person would have done the same. "Now let's get you inside before you freeze solid." He grabbed her trunk and the box of books, carrying both as though they weighed nothing, and led her out of the barn and across the short distance to the house. The snow was already ankle-deep and still falling, and Adelaide was grateful for the brevity of the exposure. Gideon kicked the door open and ushered her inside, and the warmth hit her like a physical force. The interior of the ranch house was simple but well-maintained, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living space combined. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, and Adelaide moved toward it instinctively, holding her hands out to the flames. Gideon set down her belongings and began building up the fire, adding logs until it roared with heat. "There's a bedroom through that door," he said, pointing to a door on the left side of the room. "You can sleep there. I'll take the bunk room with the hands when they get back, or I'll sleep out here by the fire if they don't make it tonight." Adelaide turned to look at him properly for the first time since they had entered the house. Snow was melting in his dark hair and running down his face, and his coat was soaked through. Despite his words about being used to the cold, he was shivering. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," she said. "You'll catch your death. I'll be fine once I warm up." But even as he spoke, his teeth chattered slightly. Adelaide made a decision. She might be a proper lady from Santa Fe, but she was also a practical woman who understood that propriety meant nothing if they both died of pneumonia. "Mr. Zimmerman, I am going to go into that bedroom and change into dry clothes. I suggest you do the same out here. Then I am going to make us both something hot to drink, assuming you have tea or coffee in this house. We can worry about the finer points of etiquette after we are both warm and fed." Gideon looked surprised, then amused. "Yes, madam. There's coffee in the tin on the shelf and a pot on the stove. I'll get the stove going for you." Adelaide retreated to the bedroom, which was Spartan but clean, with a large bed covered in a patchwork quilt and a dresser with a mirror above it. She stripped off her wet clothes with fingers that were still clumsy from cold, and dressed in the warmest things she owned, a wool dress that had been her mother's and a heavy shawl. When she emerged, Gideon had changed into dry clothes and was indeed getting the stove going, coaxing flame from kindling with practiced ease. "You're good at that," Adelaide observed, finding the coffee tin and the pot. "Had a lot of practice. When you live alone, you learn to do everything for yourself or you go without." Gideon straightened, and Adelaide saw he was taller than she had realized, well over 6 feet. In the lamplight, his features were less harsh, almost handsome despite the scar and the weathered skin. "I can make the coffee if you want to sit and rest. I'd rather keep busy." Adelaide had already filled the pot with water from the pump by the sink and was measuring out coffee grounds. "It helps me think." "Think about what?" "About how I'm going to explain to the school board in Lordsburg that I was stranded alone with a man for a week. Even with the circumstances, some people will talk." Adelaide set the pot on the stove and turned to face him. "I'm not blaming you. You saved my life today and I'm grateful. But I'm also practical enough to know that this situation could ruin my reputation before I've even started my new position." Gideon was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. "What if we told them we were married?" Adelaide stared at him. "What?" "Not actually married, just pretending to be." Gideon spoke quickly, as though working through the idea as he went. "You could say you're my wife, that I was bringing you home to the ranch when the storm hit. No one in Lordsburg knows you yet, and my ranch is isolated enough that my hands won't spread gossip if I ask them not to. When the storm clears, you can go to Lordsburg and no one will be the wiser." "That's lying." Adelaide felt her face flush. "I can't start my new life with a lie." "You're right. Forget I suggested it." Gideon ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I'm just trying to think of a way to protect your reputation." "I know, and I appreciate it." Adelaide heard the coffee beginning to boil and turned to tend to it, grateful for the excuse to look away from him. "But I think the truth is probably the best option. If people choose to think badly of me despite the circumstances, then they aren't people whose opinions I value anyway. You're braver than most." "No, just out of options." Adelaide poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to Gideon. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she felt a jolt of something she could not name, something that had nothing to do with the cold or the danger of the day. She pulled her hand back quickly, cradling the hot cup between her palms. They drank in silence for a few minutes, the warmth of the coffee spreading through Adelaide's chest and belly. Outside, the wind howled and the snow continued to fall, but inside the ranch house, it was warm and quiet and strangely peaceful. Adelaide found herself studying Gideon over the rim of her cup, noticing details she had missed before. The way his shoulders hunched slightly, as though he carried some invisible weight. The lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned, despite the hardness of his life. The gentleness in his hands as he set down his cup. "Can I ask you something personal?" Adelaide said. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Fair enough." Adelaide took a breath. "Why do you live alone? You mentioned hiring hands during busy seasons, but why not have permanent help? This is a big ranch to run by yourself." Gideon was silent for so long that Adelaide thought he was not going to answer. Then he said quietly, "I was engaged once. She was a merchant's daughter from Silver City, pretty and sweet, and everything I thought I wanted. We were going to be married, fill this house with children, build a life together. Then she met a lawyer from back east, someone who could give her a house in town and a life that didn't involve mud and cattle and isolation. She broke off our engagement and married him within 3 months." "I'm sorry." Adelaide felt a pang of sympathy for the pain in his voice. "Don't be. She made the right choice for her, and I eventually realized I was more in love with the idea of not being alone than I was with her specifically." Gideon met Adelaide's eyes. "But after that, I stopped trying. Easier to be alone than to risk that kind of hurt again. Adelaide understood that impulse more than she wanted to admit. After watching her father slowly drink himself to death following her mother's passing, after seeing how love could destroy as easily as it could create, she had made similar choices. Teaching had seemed like a safe path, a way to have purpose without risking her heart. "That's a lonely way to live," she said softly. "So is yours." Gideon's gaze was penetrating. "Running to a new town where you don't know anyone, hiding behind a schoolteacher's reputation. We're not so different, you and I." Adelaide wanted to deny it, but she could not. He was right. They were both running from pain, both choosing safety over risk, both building walls around their hearts. The recognition created an unexpected connection between them, a sense of understanding that went beyond the circumstance of their meeting. "Maybe we could both try being a little less alone," Adelaide said, then immediately regretted the words. They sounded like a proposition, which was not what she had meant at all. "I mean as friends, while I'm here, since we're both stuck in this house together anyway." Gideon's expression softened. "I'd like that, Miss Morrison. Adelaide, if we're going to be friends, you should call me Adelaide. Then you should call me Gideon." They smiled at each other, and Adelaide felt something shift in the air between them, something warm and fragile and new. It scared her almost as much as falling from the wagon had, but in a different way. This was the fear of possibility rather than danger, the fear of wanting something she had convinced herself she did not need. "Are you hungry?" Gideon asked, breaking the moment. "I have stew left over from yesterday. It's not fancy, but it's filling. I'm starving, actually." Adelaide had not realized until he mentioned it, but she had not eaten since breakfast, and that had been hours ago. Gideon heated the stew on the stove while Adelaide set the table, finding plates and forks in the simple cabinets. They worked together with surprising ease, moving around each other in the small kitchen space, as though they had done this 100 times before. The stew was indeed simple, just beef and vegetables in a thick broth, but it tasted like the finest meal Adelaide had ever eaten. "This is delicious," she said honestly. "Did you make it? I'm a decent cook by necessity. When you live alone, you either learn to feed yourself or you starve." Gideon soaked a piece of bread in his stew. "What about you? Do you cook?" "I can manage the basics. My mother taught me before she died, though she was never enthusiastic about it. She would rather have been reading or writing letters to her family back east." Adelaide smiled at the memory. "My father used to joke that we survived on burnt toast and good intentions." "Sounds like your parents were well matched." They were. Impractical and idealistic and completely devoted to each other. Adelaide felt the familiar ache of loss. "When my mother died of fever 8 years ago, my father never really recovered. He kept living, kept working, but part of him died with her. By the time he finally followed her last fall, I think it was almost a relief. For him, at least." "And for you?" Gideon asked gently. Adelaide considered the question. "For me, it was complicated. I loved my father, but I was also angry at him for giving up, for leaving me alone to deal with all his debts and mistakes. I know that's not fair. He couldn't help being sad, but grief makes people selfish sometimes. Grief makes people human." Gideon reached across the table and covered her hand with his own, a brief touch that conveyed more comfort than words could. "You're allowed to feel however you feel." Adelaide blinked back unexpected tears. She had spent the months since her father's death being strong, being practical, handling all the details of death and debt without breaking down. No one had given her permission to be angry or hurt or anything other than bravely resigned. Gideon's simple acceptance of her complicated feelings touched something deep inside her. "Thank you," she whispered. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, Then Adelaide insisted on washing the dishes while Gideon checked the fire and made sure the house was secure for the night. The wind outside had reached a shrieking pitch, and Adelaide could hear what sounded like things blowing against the walls. The storm was in full force now, and she was profoundly grateful to be inside and safe. "The hands definitely won't make it back tonight," Gideon said, peering out the window into the white darkness. "They'll have taken shelter in one of the line shacks up in the high country. They know the routine when bad weather hits." "Will they be all right?" Adelaide asked, concerned. "They'll be fine. The line shacks are stocked with food and firewood for exactly this kind of situation. They'll be uncomfortable but safe." Gideon turned from the window. "You should get some sleep. It's been a long day for you." Adelaide realized she was exhausted, her body aching from the fall and the cold ride and the emotional turmoil of the day. "What about you?" "I'll sleep out here by the fire. I want to keep it going through the night to make sure the house stays warm." Gideon was already spreading blankets on the floor near the hearth. "Don't worry about me. I've slept in worse places than this." Adelaide wanted to argue, but she could see he had made up his mind. "Good night, then, and Gideon, thank you for everything." "Good night, Adelaide." She retreated to the bedroom and closed the door, then collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, too tired to even remove her shoes. She pulled the quilt over herself and closed her eyes, expecting to fall asleep immediately. Instead, her mind raced, replaying the events of the day. The wagon tipping. The sensation of flying through the air. Gideon's voice saying, "I've got you now." His arms around her on the horse. The way he had looked at her across the dinner table, as though he truly saw her, not just the proper facade she showed the world. Adelaide rolled onto her side, facing the wall, and tried to calm her racing thoughts. This was just circumstance, she told herself. Proximity and gratitude and relief at being safe. She did not really know Gideon at all. She would stay here until the storm cleared, then go to Lordsburg and begin her new life as planned. Whatever strange connection she felt to the man sleeping by the fire in the next room would fade once they parted ways. But even as she thought it, Adelaide knew she was lying to herself. Something had shifted today, something fundamental and frightening and undeniable. For the first time in years, she felt truly awake, truly alive, and the cause was a scarred cowboy who lived alone and cooked his own stew and looked at her as though she mattered. Adelaide finally slept, but her dreams were full of dark eyes and gentle hands, and a voice saying, "I've got you now." She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and the sound of someone moving around in the main room. For a moment, Adelaide could not remember where she was, and then everything came rushing back. She sat up, disoriented, and saw that pale light was filtering through the bedroom window. The storm was still raging outside, but it was morning. She had survived the night, and that seemed like an accomplishment worth celebrating. Adelaide rose and smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could, then opened the bedroom door. Gideon was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the same competence he seemed to bring to everything. He looked up when she entered and smiled, and Adelaide felt her heart skip foolishly. "Good morning. I hope I didn't wake you." "No, I was ready to get up." Adelaide moved to the table, where Gideon had already set out plates and cups. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough." Gideon plated bacon and eggs and set them in front of her before serving himself. "The storm is worse this morning. I'm going to need to go out to the barn after breakfast to check on the animals and make sure nothing has blown down, but otherwise we're stuck inside for the duration." "Can I help with anything?" Adelaide asked, feeling useless. "Keep me company. Talk to me so I don't go crazy from the silence." Gideon sat down across from her. "I'm used to being alone, but that doesn't mean I always enjoy it." They ate breakfast while the wind screamed outside and the snow piled higher. Gideon told Adelaide about his ranch, about the cattle he raised and the horses he trained, about the challenges of making a living in such an isolated place. Adelaide told him about her students in Santa Fe, about the children she had taught to read and write, about how rewarding it was to watch someone's eyes light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. "You love teaching," Gideon observed. "I do. It's the one thing I've never doubted." Adelaide sipped her coffee. "Even when everything else in my life was falling apart, I could go into that schoolroom and know I was doing something that mattered. That's how I feel about the ranch." Gideon looked around the simple room as though seeing something Adelaide could not. "My father started this place with nothing but determination and stubbornness. He built it into something that could sustain a family, and I've kept it going after his death. It's hard work and sometimes it's lonely, but it's mine. It matters." Adelaide understood that completely. The need to build something, to create meaning out of chaos, to leave a mark on the world that proved you existed. They were more alike than she had realized. She and this rough cowboy who read books and made stew and saved foolish women from snowbanks. After breakfast, Gideon bundled up in his heavy coat and went out to tend the animals. Adelaide cleaned the kitchen, then wandered around the main room, examining the few personal items on display. There were books on a shelf, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a few novels and a worn copy of poetry by Walt Whitman. There was a photograph in a frame on the mantel, showing a stern-faced couple Adelaide assumed were Gideon's parents, and another of 3 young men who must have been Gideon and his brothers. The door burst open, bringing a gust of snow and cold air, and Gideon, his face red from the wind. "The barn is fine and the animals are secure," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "But we're going to be snowed in for days, not just 1 or 2. I've never seen it come down this hard." "Is that dangerous?" Adelaide helped him out of his coat. "Not if we're smart about it. We have plenty of food and firewood and the house is solid. We'll be fine, just bored." Gideon hung his coat by the door and moved to warm his hands by the fire. "I hope you don't mind being stuck with me. I can think of worse fates." Adelaide surprised herself with the honesty of the statement. "At least you're good company." "Am I?" Gideon looked pleased. "I'll take that as high praise from a schoolteacher." They settled into an unexpected routine over the following days. The storm continued without letting up, trapping them completely inside the ranch house. They took turns cooking meals, neither of them particularly skilled but both competent enough to avoid starvation. They read books, sometimes aloud to each other, sitting by the fire while the wind howled outside. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, debating politics and religion and philosophy with a frankness that Adelaide had never experienced with anyone else. Gideon was, she discovered, surprisingly well-read and thoughtful despite his rough exterior. He had opinions on everything from President Grant's policies to the future of the Western Territories, and he listened to Adelaide's views with genuine interest rather than condescension. He treated her as an equal, which was such a rare experience for Adelaide that she found herself opening up to him in ways she had never opened up to anyone. On the 3rd day of the storm, Adelaide was reading to Gideon from her box of books when she came across a love poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She hesitated, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the words, of the warmth in the room, of the way Gideon was looking at her. But she read it anyway, her voice soft in the firelight. When she finished, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. Adelaide set the book down, her hands trembling slightly, and found the courage to meet Gideon's eyes. What she saw there made her breath catch. Want and tenderness and something that looked almost like pain. Adelaide, Gideon said quietly, and just her name in his voice made her heart race. Yes, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before I lose my nerve. Gideon shifted closer on the floor where they both sat, close enough that Adelaide could feel the heat radiating from his body. I know we haven't known each other long. I know you have a life planned in Lordsburg, and I have no right to ask you to change those plans. But I have to be honest with you, because if I'm not, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Adelaide's pulse thundered in her ears. What is it? I'm falling in love with you. Gideon's voice was rough with emotion. I've been falling since the moment I pulled you out of that snowbank, and you looked at me like I was worth seeing. These past days with you have been the happiest I've had in years, and the thought of you leaving when the storm clears makes me want to ride out into that blizzard, just to avoid feeling what I know I'm going to feel. Adelaide could not breathe. She had known on some level that something was growing between them, but hearing Gideon say it out loud made it real and terrifying and wonderful all at once. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Gideon started to pull back, but Adelaide reached out and caught his hand. Wait. She held on tight, her heart making decisions her mind was still trying to process. I need you to know something too. I'm falling in love with you as well. I didn't expect it, I didn't plan for it, and I'm absolutely terrified of it. But it's true. Gideon's eyes widened, and then he was moving, closing the distance between them and cupping her face in his rough, gentle hands. May I kiss you? Yes. Adelaide barely got the word out before his lips were on hers, soft and insistent and perfect. She had been kissed before, chaste pecks from suitors her father had approved of, but this was nothing like those fumbling encounters. This was heat and hunger and a connection so intense it felt like being remade. She kissed him back with all the loneliness and longing she had been carrying, and felt him respond with equal passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adelaide rested her forehead against Gideon's and laughed shakily. What are we doing? Something reckless and probably stupid, Gideon said, but he was smiling. I don't care. I spent too long being careful and safe and alone. I don't want to do that anymore. Neither do I. Adelaide kissed him again, softer this time, savoring the feel of his lips on hers. But we need to be practical. I still have the teaching position in Lordsburg. They're expecting me. Then don't go. Gideon pulled back enough to look into her eyes. Stay here. Marry me. We'll figure out the rest together. You can't be serious. We've known each other less than a week. I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. But I also know what I feel, and I know that I don't want to let you walk out of my life because I was too much of a coward to ask you to stay. Gideon's hands were still cradling her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. I'm not saying you have to decide right now, but think about it, please. Adelaide wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to throw caution to the wind and embrace the future Gideon was offering. But years of being her father's practical daughter held her back. What if we're wrong? What if this is just proximity and gratitude and the drama of the situation? What if we get married and then realize we don't actually love each other at all? What if we're right? Gideon countered. What if this is real and we walk away from it because we're too afraid to take a chance? Which risk is worse, Adelaide? The risk of being wrong about love, or the risk of letting it go without finding out? Adelaide had no answer to that. She pulled away from him reluctantly and stood, needing space to think. She walked to the window and stared out at the endless white, trying to sort through her tangled emotions. The teaching position in Lordsburg represented safety, independence, a life she could control. But it also represented more loneliness, more walls around her heart, more years of existing rather than truly living. Gideon represented risk and uncertainty, and the possibility of profound happiness or equally profound pain. But he also represented the chance to be seen, to be loved, to build something meaningful with another person. The way her parents had built something, before death had torn it apart. My father loved my mother so much that when she died, he couldn't survive without her, Adelaide said quietly, still staring out the window. I watched him slowly destroy himself because he couldn't bear to live in a world that didn't have her in it. That kind of love is terrifying, Gideon. What if I love you that much and then lose you? What if I end up like my father, a ghost living in the past? Gideon came up behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. What if you don't lose me? What if we have 50 years together, Adelaide? Wouldn't that be worth the risk? Adelaide turned to face him, and the tenderness in his eyes nearly undid her. How can you be so sure? I'm not sure. Not about the future, because nobody can be sure about that. But I'm sure about what I feel right now, and I'm sure that I want to try. That's all we can ever really have, Adelaide. This moment and the choice we make in it. He was right. Adelaide knew he was right. And in that moment, standing in a ranch house surrounded by snow and firelight with a man she barely knew but somehow understood completely, Adelaide made a choice. She chose risk over safety. She chose possibility over certainty. She chose love. Ask me again, she whispered, Gideon's face transformed, hope blazing in his dark eyes. Adelaide Morrison, will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me and take a chance on this crazy thing between us? Yes. The word came out strong and sure, and as soon as Adelaide said it, she felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. Yes, I'll marry you. Gideon let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. And then he was lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, kissing her with a joy that was utterly infectious. Adelaide laughed against his mouth, dizzy with happiness and the sudden certainty that she had just made the best decision of her life. When? Gideon asked when he finally set her down. When can we get married? After the storm clears. We'll need to get to town, find a preacher. Adelaide was already thinking practically, planning. And I'll need to send word to Lordsburg that I won't be taking the position. Someone else will need that job. Are you sure? Gideon's expression turned serious. I don't want you to resent me later for giving up something you wanted. I'm sure. And Adelaide was. I wanted the teaching position because it represented safety and independence. But what I really want is to matter to someone, to build something meaningful. I can do that here with you, just as well as I could in Lordsburg. Better, probably, because I won't be doing it alone. You'll never be alone again, Gideon promised, and kissed her once more to seal the vow. The storm finally broke on the 5th day, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. The drifts were taller than Adelaide in places, and the sun reflecting off all that white was almost blinding. Gideon spent hours digging paths from the house to the barn and the other outbuildings, and Adelaide helped as much as she could, though she was unused to the physical labor. The ranch hands returned that afternoon, 2 weather-beaten men in their 40s who looked at Adelaide with undisguised curiosity. Gideon introduced her simply as his fiancée, and the men accepted this with congratulations and knowing looks that suggested they understood more than they said. We'll need to get to town, Gideon told them after they had all shared a meal. Miss Morrison and I want to be married as soon as possible, and we'll need supplies for when we return. Can you 2 handle things here for a few days? Of course, boss, the older of the 2 men, whose name was Jim, replied. Everything's secure here. Take your time. They left the next morning at first light, Gideon and Adelaide riding double again, but this time in bright sunshine rather than blinding snow. The journey to Silver City took most of the day, the road still treacherous from the storm, but Adelaide did not mind. She spent the ride pressed against Gideon's chest, his arms around her, and felt safer and happier than she had in years. Silver City was larger than Adelaide had expected, a bustling mining town that had grown prosperous in recent years. Gideon took her first to a boarding house run by a respectable widow, where Adelaide could stay until they were married, then to the general store to send a telegram to Lordsburg explaining her change in plans. "Are you really doing this?" the telegraph operator asked as Adelaide composed her message. He was a gossip, she could tell, eager for any interesting news to spread around town. "I really am," Adelaide said firmly, and wrote out her resignation without a shred of regret. They found a preacher who agreed to marry them the following day, a kindly old man with gentle eyes who asked them only whether they were both entering the marriage freely and of sound mind. When they assured him they were, he smiled and said that was all that mattered. "Young love is a beautiful thing," he said, "especially out here where life is hard and joy is rare. I'll be honored to perform the ceremony." Gideon insisted on buying Adelaide a new dress for the wedding, something she protested but secretly appreciated. Her traveling clothes were still stained from her fall into the snow, and while she did not need anything fancy, she did want to look her best. The dress they found was simple but lovely, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, with lace at the collar and cuffs. That evening, staying in separate rooms at the boarding house to maintain some semblance of propriety, Adelaide lay awake and wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. She was marrying a man she had known for less than 2 weeks, giving up her plans and her independence, tying her future to someone who was still, in many ways, a stranger. It was reckless and impulsive and completely unlike her usual careful approach to life. But when she tried to imagine walking away, tried to imagine going to Lordsburg alone and never seeing Gideon again, Adelaide felt a pain so sharp it took her breath away. That had to mean something. Love was a risk, but so was refusing to love. At least this way she would have tried. The wedding the next day was small and simple, with only the preacher and 2 witnesses pulled from the street to make it legal. Adelaide wore her new blue dress and Gideon wore his best shirt and pants, his hair slicked back and his scar somehow making him look even more handsome. When he took her hands and spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and Adelaide felt her doubts dissolve. "I promise to love you and care for you for as long as we both live," Gideon said, his dark eyes holding hers. "I promise to be faithful and true, to work hard to give you the life you deserve, and to never take for granted the gift of your presence in my days. You are my unexpected blessing, Adelaide, and I will spend the rest of my life earning the trust you've placed in me." Adelaide's own vows came from her heart rather than any script the preacher had provided. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings us. I promise to be honest and loyal, to share your burdens and your joys, and to never stop choosing you, even when it would be easier to walk away. You saw me when I was lost, Gideon, and you helped me find my way home. I will never forget that gift." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Gideon he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was sweet and tender and full of promise. Adelaide felt tears on her cheeks and did not bother to wipe them away. These were happy tears, earned tears, and she was not ashamed of them. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, and Adelaide would treasure the memory forever. Gideon was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. He had been with women before, she could tell from his easy confidence, but he treated her as though she were precious and fragile, something to be honored rather than taken. Adelaide had heard other women speak of marital duties with resignation or even dread, but there was no duty in what she and Gideon shared that night, only love and desire and a connection that felt sacred. "Are you happy?" Gideon asked afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed. "So happy I'm afraid I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." Adelaide traced the scar through his eyebrow with one finger. "How did you get this?" "Bar fight when I was 20 and stupid. I tried to break up an argument between two drunk minors and caught an elbow to the face." Gideon caught her hand and kissed her palm. "It's not very romantic. I like it. It makes you look dangerous." Adelaide smiled. "Though I'm learning you're about as dangerous as a kitten. Don't let that get around. I have a reputation to maintain." Gideon pulled her closer, and Adelaide rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking about?" "About how much my life has changed in just a week. If someone had told me when I boarded that wagon in Santa Fe that I would end up here, married to a cowboy I had just met, I would have thought they were insane." "Regrets?" Gideon's voice was carefully neutral. "None." Adelaide lifted her head to look at him. "Gideon, I need you to understand something. I'm not naive or swept away by romance or deluding myself. I know this marriage is a risk. I know we're going to have hard times and disagreements and moments when we question whether we made the right choice. But I also know that I love you, and that's not going to change just because things get difficult. I love you too." Gideon cupped her face in his hands. "And you're right, it won't always be easy, but we'll face it together, and that makes all the difference." They returned to the ranch 2 days later, loaded down with supplies and wedding presents from the shopkeepers in Silver City who had heard about the romance and been charmed by it. Adelaide was both amused and embarrassed by the attention, but Gideon seemed to take it in stride. "Small towns love a good love story," he said as they rode away from Silver City. "Gives people something pleasant to talk about for a change." The ranch hands greeted them with genuine warmth when they arrived, and Jim presented Adelaide with a carved wooden jewelry box he had made during their absence. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said formally, and Adelaide felt a rush of emotion at the name. She was married. She had a home. She belonged somewhere. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment, as Adelaide learned the rhythms of ranch life and Gideon learned to share his space with another person. There were awkward moments and small conflicts over things like how to organize the kitchen or when to go to bed, but they navigated them with humor and patience. Adelaide discovered she liked the physical work of the ranch, the sense of accomplishment that came from feeding chickens or tending a vegetable garden. Gideon discovered he liked having someone to talk to at the end of long days, someone who challenged him and made him laugh. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and the snow melted to reveal the land beneath. Adelaide planted flowers around the house and vegetables in a garden plot Gideon helped her prepare. She also began teaching the ranch hands to read in the evenings, something they were initially skeptical about but came to enjoy. Gideon watched her with pride as she patiently sounded out words with Jim and the other hand, whose name was Carlos. "You're a natural teacher," Gideon said one night as they lay in bed. "Those men are learning more from you in a few weeks than they learned in years of schooling." "They're motivated," Adelaide said. "That makes all the difference. They want to be able to read contracts and write letters home. They have a reason to learn. Still, you have a gift." Gideon kissed her temple. "Have you thought about starting a school here? I know there are families scattered around the valley who would pay for their children to be educated." Adelaide had thought about it, actually, quite a bit. The idea of teaching again, but on her own terms and in her own space, was appealing. "Do you think there would be enough interest?" "I know there would be. I could help you build a schoolroom, maybe attached to the house or as a separate building. You could teach during the school year and have summers free." Gideon was warming to the idea as he spoke. "It would give you something of your own, Adelaide. I know being a ranch wife isn't what you planned." "It's better than what I planned," Adelaide said honestly, "but I do miss teaching. If you're serious about helping me start a school, I would love that." "I'm serious. We'll start planning tomorrow." They did, and by summer Adelaide had a small schoolroom attached to the side of the ranch house, with benches Gideon had built and a blackboard ordered from Silver City. She spread the word through the valley that she was accepting students, and by fall she had 8 children of various ages, the sons and daughters of neighboring ranchers and homesteaders. She taught them reading and writing, arithmetic and geography, and felt her soul settle in a way it had not since before her father's death. Gideon was as good as his word about supporting her work. He helped with the school whenever she needed him, and he never complained about the noise or disruption of having children around. He seemed to enjoy it, actually, teasing the students gently and helping the older boys with their work when Adelaide was busy with the younger ones. "You're good with them," Adelaide observed one afternoon as she watched Gideon explain a math problem to a struggling 12-year-old. "I remember what it was like to be their age, trying to learn while also worrying about chores and work, and whether there would be enough food for winter." Gideon looked up at her and smiled. "Education is important, but so is kindness. These kids need both." Adelaide's love for her husband grew deeper with every passing day, rooted not just in passion but in respect and admiration for the man he was. He was kind and hardworking, patient and thoughtful, and he treated her as a true partner rather than a subordinate. They made decisions together, shared responsibilities, and built a life that honored both their strengths. By their first anniversary, Adelaide knew she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be sure before telling Gideon. When she finally shared the news one evening as they sat by the fire, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby." Gideon's face lit up with such joy that Adelaide felt her own happiness multiply. "We're going to have a baby in about 6 months if my calculations are correct." Adelaide took his hands. "Are you happy?" Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Gideon pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. "You've given me everything, Adelaide. A home that feels warm, work that feels meaningful, and now a family. I didn't know it was possible to be this content." "We've given each other everything," Adelaide corrected. "I couldn't have built this life alone, Gideon. You made it possible." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and Adelaide continued teaching until she was too large to stand comfortably for long periods. Gideon fussed over her constantly, bringing her tea and pillows and anything else she might need, until Adelaide finally had to tell him to stop hovering. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said, laughing at his worried expression. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." "I know, I just worry. You're the most important thing in my life, Adelaide." "If something happened to you," Gideon's voice broke, and Adelaide understood suddenly that his concern came from love and fear in equal measure. "Nothing is going to happen to me," she said firmly. "We're going to have this baby, and then we're going to raise it together and be annoyingly happy for decades. Trust me." The baby came in early spring, during a warm spell that felt like a gift after the long winter. Adelaide's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when she questioned whether she would survive it. But Gideon stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead, and telling her she was strong and brave and doing beautifully, even when she knew she looked like a mess and felt like dying. When their son finally entered the world, squalling and red-faced and perfect. Adelaide wept with relief and joy. Gideon cut the cord with shaking hands, then cradled the tiny baby against his chest with such tenderness that Adelaide fell in love with him all over again. "He's beautiful," Gideon said, his voice thick with emotion. "He looks like you." "He has your eyes," Adelaide said, seeing the dark color even in the baby's unfocused gaze. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Adelaide knew exactly what felt right. "Henry," she said, "after my father. He would have loved this baby, Gideon. He would have loved knowing that something good came out of all the sadness." "Henry Zimmerman." Gideon tested the name and nodded. "It's perfect." "He's perfect." He leaned down and kissed Adelaide gently. "Thank you, for him, for everything." Adelaide dozed while Gideon held the baby, exhausted from the labor but deeply content. When she woke an hour later, Gideon was still holding Henry, rocking him gently and humming a tune Adelaide did not recognize. The sight made her chest tight with love. "What are you singing?" she asked softly. "Something my mother used to sing to me and my brothers. I can't remember all the words, but the melody stuck." Gideon looked up at her. "How are you feeling?" "Sore and tired and happier than I have any right to be." Adelaide held out her arms. "Can I have him back?" Gideon handed over the baby carefully, and Adelaide tucked Henry against her breast, marveling at his tiny fingers and the downy hair on his head. He was real and alive and theirs, a person they had created together out of love and hope. It felt like a miracle. The first months of Henry's life were exhausting in ways Adelaide had not anticipated. She loved her son fiercely, but she also missed sleep and privacy, and the ability to have a conversation with Gideon that was not interrupted by crying or the need to feed or change the baby. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, when the weight of responsibility crushed her, and she wondered if she was doing everything wrong. Gideon was her anchor during those times. He took over with Henry whenever Adelaide needed a break, walking the baby around the ranch at all hours of the night when he would not stop crying, changing diapers without complaint, and constantly reassuring Adelaide that she was doing a wonderful job even when she felt like a failure. "All new parents feel this way," he told her one night when Adelaide was crying from sheer exhaustion. "It's hard and confusing and scary, but we're figuring it out together. Henry is healthy and loved, and that's what matters." "What if I'm a terrible mother?" Adelaide asked, voicing her deepest fear. "You're not. You're patient and caring, and you put his needs above your own constantly. That's what makes a good mother." Gideon held her close. "You're allowed to be tired and frustrated sometimes. That doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you human." As Henry grew, things became easier. He started sleeping through the night, then smiling and laughing, then sitting up and babbling. Each milestone felt like a celebration, proof that they were doing something right. Adelaide reopened her school when Henry was 6 months old, bringing him with her and letting him play in a corner while she taught. The students were fascinated by the baby and often helped entertain him, which Adelaide appreciated. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Adelaide taught her students during the school year and tended her garden in the summer. Gideon worked the ranch with his hands, expanding the herd and improving the land. They raised Henry together, sharing responsibilities and delighting in every new thing he learned. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley and talking about their day, and Adelaide would think about how close she had come to missing all of this. If the wagon wheel had not broken. If Gideon had not been riding that road at that exact moment. If she had been too afraid to take a chance on love. Her entire life had hinged on those improbable coincidences, and she was grateful for every single one. By the time Henry was 3, Adelaide was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and Gideon was less anxious, though still attentive. Their second child was a girl, born in the fall during harvest time. They named her Rose after Gideon's mother, and she had her father's dark hair and her mother's quick smile. Raising 2 children while teaching and running a household was chaotic, but Adelaide thrived on it. She loved the noise and mess and constant activity, so different from the quiet loneliness of her life before Gideon. She loved watching Henry teach Rose things, loved seeing Gideon's face light up when his daughter laughed, loved the sense of building something that would outlast them both. The years passed quickly, measured in milestones and memories. Henry started helping Gideon with ranch work as soon as he was old enough, following his father around with eager determination. Rose showed an early aptitude for reading and writing, and Adelaide suspected she would be a teacher herself someday. They had another baby, a boy they named Samuel, when Henry was 8 and Rose was 5. Samuel was a surprise, conceived during a rare weekend alone when the older children were visiting their grandmother in Silver City, and he brought fresh energy and laughter to the household. Adelaide's school grew as well, becoming well known throughout the valley. She taught dozens of children over the years, many of whom went on to accomplish things their parents had never dreamed possible. Several became teachers themselves, carrying on Adelaide's legacy of education and empowerment. She was proud of that legacy, proud of the difference she had made. Through it all, her marriage to Gideon remained strong. They still had disagreements, still had moments of frustration or misunderstanding, but they had learned to communicate and compromise. They made time for each other despite the demands of work and children, stealing moments of intimacy and conversation whenever they could. The passion of their early days had matured into something deeper and more sustainable, a love built on trust and respect and shared history. One evening, when Adelaide was 45 and Gideon was 48, they sat together on the porch and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. Henry had married a rancher's daughter and had 3 children of his own. Rose had married a lawyer from Silver City and had 2. Samuel, at 15, was still finding his way but showed signs of becoming a fine young man. "Can you believe this is our life?" Adelaide asked, leaning against Gideon's shoulder. "Sometimes I still feel like that terrified woman falling into a snowbank, not sure if she's going to survive the next moment. I'm glad you survived." Gideon wrapped his arm around her. "I'm glad I was there that day, glad I saw your wagon go off the road, glad I said I've got you now and meant it. You did mean it, didn't you? All these years later, you're still catching me when I fall." Adelaide turned to kiss him, a gentle press of lips that still held the spark of their early passion. "I love you, Gideon Zimmerman. I have loved you since the day you pulled me from that snow, and I will love you until the day I die. And I love you, Adelaide. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God for that broken wagon wheel every single day." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Adelaide thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment, all the choices and chances and small miracles that had combined to give her this life. She thought about her father, who had loved her mother so much that losing her had broken him, and realized that she finally understood that depth of feeling. She loved Gideon that much, loved their children that much, loved the life they had built that much. But unlike her father, Adelaide had found the strength to keep living even when life was hard. She had learned that love did not have to destroy you, that it could sustain and nurture and help you grow. She had learned that taking risks could lead to rewards beyond imagination, And that sometimes the best path forward was the one you never planned to take. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Adelaide squeezed Gideon's hand and smiled. They had grown old together, built a family together, created a legacy together. They had been ranchers and teachers, parents and grandparents, partners in every sense of the word. They had faced hardships and celebrated triumphs, and through it all they had chosen each other, day after day, year after year. It had started with a fall into the snow and a cowboy who dismounted and said, "I've got you now." And he had kept that promise, holding her steady through storms and sunshine alike, proving that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings led to the most beautiful endings. Years continued to unfold in that valley, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. Adelaide and Gideon watched their children and grandchildren grow, celebrated births and mourned deaths, and found that their love only deepened with time. When they were both in their 60s, Gideon's hands became too arthritic to work the ranch as he once had, and Henry took over the day-to-day operations. Adelaide had closed her school a few years earlier, her eyesight failing too much to teach comfortably, but she still tutored children privately and wrote letters for neighbors who could not read or write. They spent their days together in simple companionship, sitting on the porch or by the fire, talking or reading or simply existing in comfortable silence. They told stories to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing down family history and the values they had built their lives upon. They watched the world change around them, saw the frontier gradually become settled and civilized, saw technology and progress arrive in their remote valley. But some things never changed. Gideon still looked at Adelaide with the same tenderness he had shown that first night in his ranch house. Adelaide still felt her heart skip when Gideon smiled at her. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed goodnight before sleeping, still said "I love you" every single day. On their 35th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were dozens of people there, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, neighbors and friends, all of whom had been touched in some way by Adelaide and Gideon's story. There was music and dancing and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it all. As the sun began to set, Henry stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "You've shown us all what real love looks like. You've taught us that marriage is not just romance. It's partnership and friendship and choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. You've built a legacy that will last for generations, and we are all better people for having you in our lives. Happy anniversary, and thank you for everything." Everyone cheered and drank, and Adelaide felt tears on her cheeks. She looked at Gideon and saw his eyes were wet too, and they smiled at each other through their tears. "We did all right, didn't we?" Gideon said softly. "We did better than all right," Adelaide replied. "We did magnificently." As the party continued around them, Adelaide thought back to that day 35 years ago when she had fallen from a wagon into the snow, and a stranger had dismounted to help her. She thought about all the fears she had harbored, all the reasons she had almost said no when Gideon proposed. How foolish those fears seemed now, in light of everything they had built together. Life was always uncertain, always risky, always capable of breaking your heart. But it was also capable of extraordinary beauty and joy if you were brave enough to reach for it. Adelaide had been brave, and so had Gideon, and together they had created something worth more than safety or certainty or any of the things Adelaide had once thought she wanted. They had created love. Real, messy, imperfect, magnificent love. The years continued their inexorable march. Gideon's health began to decline when he was 72. His heart, weakening under the strain of a life of hard work. Adelaide nursed him through his final months with the same tenderness he had always shown her, reading to him and holding his hand and reminding him of all the beautiful memories they had made together. "I'm not afraid," Gideon said one night near the end, his voice barely a whisper. "I've had a good life, Adelaide, better than I ever expected or deserved, and most of that goodness came from you." "You gave me just as much," Adelaide said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved, Gideon. I was so lost before you found me." "We saved each other." Gideon lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles. "Promise me you'll be all right after I'm gone. Promise me you'll keep living, keep finding joy, keep being the remarkable woman you've always been." "I promise," Adelaide whispered, even though she could not imagine how she would keep that promise. Gideon died peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his family, with Adelaide holding his hand and whispering that she loved him. The grief that followed was crushing, more painful than anything Adelaide had ever experienced. She understood her father's despair now in a way she never had before, understood how losing the person you loved most in the world could make you want to stop existing. But she had made Gideon a promise, and she intended to keep it. Adelaide leaned on her children and grandchildren, allowed them to support her through the worst of the grief, and slowly began to find her way forward. She discovered that Gideon lived on in her memories, in their children, in the ranch they had built together and the legacy of love they had created. He was gone, but he was not absent, and that distinction made all the difference. Adelaide lived another 10 years after Gideon's death, years she spent surrounded by family and filled with purpose. She helped raise great-grandchildren, advised her adult children on their problems, and continued to be a pillar of the community. She wrote down her and Gideon's story so that future generations would know how their family began, started with a fall into the snow and a cowboy who chose to help a stranger. When Adelaide was 82, she became ill with pneumonia. She knew from the beginning that she would not recover, and she was not sorry. She had lived a long and full life, had loved and been loved, had made a difference in the world. She was ready to rest. On her final day, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Adelaide looked around at the faces she loved and smiled. "Don't be sad," she told them. "I've had a wonderful life and I'm going to see your father again. That's not something to grieve." Henry leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, Mama, for everything you gave us, for everything you taught us. We love you." "I love you too," Adelaide said. "All of you so very much. Now let me sleep. I'm tired." She closed her eyes and drifted off, her hand held by her daughter Rose, her heart full of peace. In her dreams she was young again, falling through the air into a snowbank, and when she looked up a dark-eyed cowboy was dismounting and reaching for her, his voice warm and sure as he said, "I've got you now." And he did. He always had. From that first moment until this last one, Gideon had caught her and held her and loved her, and that love had made all the difference. Adelaide let go of life with a smile on her face, knowing she had been blessed beyond measure, knowing she had taken a risk and reaped rewards she could never have imagined, knowing that love was always, always worth the fear. The story that had begun with a broken wagon and a snowstorm ended peacefully in a quiet room, but the legacy of that love lived on. Adelaide and Gideon's descendants spread throughout the West, carrying with them the values of hard work and education, and choosing love over fear. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations, a testament to what two people could build together when they dared to take a chance. And sometimes, on winter nights when the snow fell thick and fast, the people who lived in that house would tell the story of Adelaide and Gideon. They would talk about how she had fallen from a wagon into the snow, and how he had dismounted and said, "I've got you now," and how that simple moment of compassion had blossomed into a love story for the ages. They would talk about how two lonely people had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a life of meaning and purpose and joy. The story always ended the same way, with a reminder that love was worth the risk, that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places, and that a single choice to be kind, to be brave, to be open to possibility, could change everything. It was a story of hope and second chances, of finding home in another person, of building something beautiful out of near disaster. It was a story of the Wild West, when life was hard and uncertain and full of danger, but also full of possibility. It was a story of a time when people had to be strong and self-reliant, but also knew the value of community and connection. It was a story rooted in a specific place and time, but with truths that transcended both. Most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple. The kind of love story that reminded people why they kept hoping, kept trying, kept believing that somewhere out there was a person who would catch them when they fell and say, "I've got you now," and mean it forever. The kind of love story that proved that happy endings were possible, even in the most unlikely circumstances, if you were brave enough to reach for them. And so the story lived on, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the most important moment of your life arrived when you least expected it, and that the choice you made in that moment could echo through decades, shaping not just your own life, but the lives of everyone who came after you. Adelaide and Gideon had made the right choice, had chosen love over fear, and their reward had been a life rich beyond measure. In the end, that was all anyone could hope for. To love and be loved, to build something meaningful, to leave the world a little better than you found it. Adelaide and Gideon had accomplished all of that and more, their love a beacon that continued to shine long after they were gone, a testament to the power of human connection and the enduring strength of the human heart. Their story was complete, their ending happy, their legacy secure. From a fall in the snow to a life of love and purpose, from strangers to soulmates, from fear to joy, Adelaide and Gideon had lived their story fully and beautifully, and in doing so had created something that would never be forgotten. The ranch still stood in that valley, the house still warm and welcoming, the land still productive and beautiful. The schoolroom Adelaide had built still educated children, though it had been expanded and modernized over the years. The family she and Gideon had created still gathered there for holidays and celebrations, still told the old stories, still remembered the love that had started it all. And on winter nights when the snow fell and the wind howled, people would look out their windows at the white world beyond and think about a woman falling from a wagon and a cowboy who chose to help. And they would smile at the reminder that magic still existed in the world, that love still conquered all, that happy endings were not just fairy tales but real possibilities for anyone brave enough to believe. That was the true end of the story, not in death but in the continuation of love through generations, not in endings but in beginnings that grew from those endings. Adelaide and Gideon's story had no real conclusion because love never truly ended. It transformed and evolved and passed on, but it never died. And so their love lived still in the valley where they had built their life, in the people who carried their blood and their values, in the stories that kept their memory alive. It was a fitting end for a story that had begun with such drama and uncertainty, a peaceful resolution that honored everything they had built together. And if the ghosts of Adelaide and Gideon sometimes walked the ranch on quiet evenings, hand in hand and smiling, No one who saw them was afraid. They were a reminder that true love was eternal, that the bonds we forged in life could transcend death itself, that some stories were too beautiful to ever truly end. So the tale of the woman who fell from the wagon into the snow and the cowboy who dismounted and said, "I've got you now," became legend. A story told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But unlike most legends, this one was true in every particular, documented in letters and journals and the memories of those who had known Adelaide and Gideon personally. It was a real story about real people who had lived real lives, and that made it all the more powerful. Because if it could happen to them, it could happen to anyone. If two lonely people could find each other in the middle of a snowstorm and build a love that lasted a lifetime, then hope was never foolish and risk was always worthwhile, and love was always, always worth reaching for, no matter how scared you were. That was the final lesson of Adelaide and Gideon's story, the truth that echoed through the decades and touched every heart that heard it. Love was worth it. Love was always worth it. And sometimes all you needed was the courage to fall and the faith that someone would be there to catch you, to dismount from their horse and reach out their hand and say, "I've got you now," and mean it with every fiber of their being. Adelaide and Gideon had found that courage and that faith, and their reward had been a lifetime of love and a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a beautiful ending to a beautiful story, and everyone who heard it was a little bit better for having experienced it, a little bit more willing to take their own risks and reach for their own loves and believe in their own happy endings. The story was complete. The circle was closed. And love, as it always did, had triumphed in the end.